My name is Kate Shone and I'm a sculptor from East Gippsland in Victoria, Australia. I work with copper mainly, but I like to paint as well. So I work in a beautiful bush studio in Meetung, and it's very rustic and quite primitive, but it's a nice place to work and I love it. Surrounded by trees, gum trees and birds, and it's quiet and out of the way, which is really nice. My upbringing, I grew up, my parents were painters, traditional painters, both of them, and my dad had a huge studio. So when I was a kid, he'd let me just use his brushes and his paints. He was very generous, and I would spend hours and hours just making things or painting in the studio. Sometimes I worked till like 3 o'clock in the morning on something, and my parents were pretty good. They just let me get on with it, and that was a really good thing, I think. They wouldn't interrupt me, and I'd just keep working. I mucked around with things. I had a pottery wheel at one stage, and I did weaving and spinning wheel. I used to spin and make things, so I was always using my hands, and eventually got into making things out of metal, which I found was really good. I could paint as well on the metal if I wanted to or not, and now I just work with copper because I just love the material. I love heating it up and beating it into shape, hammering, forming shapes, soldering, and I really enjoy that. Biggest influences in my life have probably been, I love people like Louise Bourgeois and Rosalie Gascoigne, who's an Australian sculptor. These were women, both women who just did whatever they wanted to do, and they weren't, bothered about their contemporaries or what was the fashion of the time, especially Louise Bourgeois. I was lucky enough to see one of her exhibitions recently, and it was very raw. It was all about wombs and birthing periods. It was very, very confronting in a way. It was good. I loved it. I could, just about had to cross my legs while I was looking at all the pictures. It was fantastic. And she had a giant spider there as well, and that was just so powerful. I loved it. I love her work. And she was a real pioneer of the women's art movement, along with people like Frida Kahlo. They just followed their souls. They just followed themselves, really. They didn't conform to anybody. Right now I'm working on some sea-themed sculptures, and they're going to the Melbourne Garden Show, so that will be good. And they're quite large. They resemble flowers, but they're not really flowers. They're like nautiluses with seaweed on them. And I like the patinated colours as well, usually greens and blues. So I've been working on them. I'm also working on a life-size figure of a warrior woman. She's wearing a suit of armour, but she's also covered in roses. So it's sort of a blend of strength and beauty at the same time, and grace. She's taken me a few years to work on, but I call that slow art, and I'm not in any hurry to finish her. She's nearly finished, and when she's finished, I'll be able to step back and have a look, and if I don't like something, I'll probably chop it off and change it. But that's the way it is, An artist has to be happy with their work, especially after working on something for 3 years. It's got to look right. My advice to my younger self would probably be, I've always been pretty headstrong, so I think maybe I would have become an artist earlier and gone to art school, and that would have been a good thing to do. But I was busy having children and raising kids and building houses, so, sometimes life gets in the way of what you really want to do. But then by the time you find your purpose or your goals in life and you get stuck into them, you really appreciate the time you've got left and the time you have to create, which is great. Unconventional mediums, I've always worked with metal the last 30 years, I suppose, and I used to scrounge at the tip and find things like corrugated iron and bits of metal, drag them home, clean them up, and then wire or pot rivet them together and make art out of them. That was pretty unconventional. My shed still has a lot of metal in there, I'm slowly cleaning it out because you can become a bit of a magpie. I think, oh, maybe one day that will be useful. You know, it's hard to get rid of it once you've acquired it, and think maybe it will work for something one day. Anyway, one day sometimes never comes, so I really have to have a clean out occasionally and give that stuff away to somebody else who might use it, which would be great. I like to work with music. Maybe sort of like I like hang drum music, sort of meditative in a way, or not songs so much. Maybe just a chanting type thing in the background with a beat. And I sort of get into a meditative state, especially if I'm hammering. Sometimes some works take quite a lot of hammering, annealing and hammering. I remember I was working on a bird bath once. It took 17 annealing sessions, so 17 hammering sessions. And I think I hammered that for 7.5 hours. And yeah, with the music going, it just kept going. I was pretty sore the next day, but I got it done, so that was good. I did a collaborative work with a friend of mine, and it was about a bit like the Me Too movement. It was to honour the people who were in servitude in England in the 18th century, 19th century. Women who basically had no rights, so basically slaves. And I'm talking about my grandmother and my great-grandmother, who became pregnant at the time and wouldn't give the identity of their father. So that exhibition centred around that theme of women being taken advantage of. And as well as making the pieces, we went around and we had talks and workshops with people. And quite a few people were in tears at the workshops, women, because similar things had happened in their family. So it was mainly about intergenerational trauma. And it was really, really interesting to find that people were so affected by something that had happened to their grandmothers 2 generations, or great-grandmothers 2 generations or 3 generations ago. But it filters through the families, and somehow it affects everybody. And what I hope people take away from my artwork is a feeling of whimsy and maybe a feeling of appreciation for marine life and an appreciation for nature, and even maybe just an appreciation for creativity. You know, if they go home and they want to create something similar, that's fantastic. Or think about forms that aren't conventional, because my work certainly isn't conventional. It's a little bit macabre, I suppose, a little bit out there. And I don't want to reproduce something perfectly, because I don't see the point in that. I want to create a kind of emotion when I create my work. So it might be, if it's a painting, I will be layering it with textures, and it'll resemble the seaweed coming in and that sort of threatening dark current underneath, and also the smell that comes in with seaweed. So I try and recreate that on a canvas, more so than a perfect depiction of water or rocks, whatever. So I love what I do, and my house, I surround myself. I suppose I nest in my house and surround myself with my own art as well as other people's art. My garden as well. And I think that's what we do, really. People walk into my house and their heads are swivelling because they're looking around, and I'm thinking, oh, do they think I'm crazy? Do they hate it? You know, but it's just what I have to do. I don't suppose I could live with just a house that didn't have any artwork in it. And it's my home. I was thinking of selling and leaving and going somewhere else and building another house, but I think this house has its grips. It's you know, I'm part of it now. I've become part of the house, and I'll never leave. But anyway, so that's me, basically. Thank you.